Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Charting Change in Legal. I'm Caroline Hill. I'm the editor-in-chief of Legal IT Insider, and I'm joined by
Kaplan, an analyst that covers the legal industry at Caroline. As always, it's a wonderful to see you and a privilege to collaborate here. And I'm excited for our conversation today.
likewise. Ari's in training for some super marathon swim, aren't you, Ari? So,
I guess I am. I am going to be swimming a 10K the weekend after ILTACON,
which
which
sounds
is
like a
which is
disaster.
it will be wonderful. I'm looking forward to it. And I always say that if it's not my day, I'll just stop at the first loop or the second loop and be finished. So
By the way, I'm not saying it will be a disaster, and that's a weird thing to start with, right? But like the idea of me doing anything after ILTA, that is a really draining
Oh
week.
yeah, I'll get some travel.
You,
I'm only so I'll
you
be
smash it.
this is a great point for people who, for our listener that we will be at ILTACON. You'll be there the entire time, right? You'll be there
I'll be there.
Sunday
I'm
through
arriving at
Thursday, right?
right. Yeah,
And I'll be there Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
yeah.
And we anticipate roving around and maybe capturing some thoughts. I don't really know exactly what we're going to do, but be on the lookout. And
Mm,
should you need to see us, there's
yeah.
only one of you. So please feel free to
Come find us.
reach out and you can find us.
We've actually
Wi-
got carried away. We've decided that we're going to order those karaoke children's microphones to
That's
rove.
right. That's right.
We, that,
We,
that's kind of that's on the board right now. As to whether we should take that idea forward. Sometimes we have the best ideas off air, and we think it's one of those ideas.
and we don't know better than to share them on air. So here we are. But with that said, speaking about ILTACON,
Yeah.
I wanted to mention this because I find that there's a little bit of a theme occurring in a lot of these discussions just throughout the industry. I'm sure you must be seeing it in your conversations, but I'm lucky to be participating in a session at ILTACON about e-discovery. And what's interesting about this particular session is not about the technology. It's not even about the e-discovery process. It's about viewing case management holistically. And I think we're in this moment now of recognizing that those who are really expert, those who add true value beyond the technology, as the technology ends up doing more of the human being's work, are those who can see what they're doing in context and bring value, recognizing that you're really not thinking necessarily and exclusively about processing a document, for example, or doing the sort of technical nuances. You're really thinking, what 20 documents are we going to use at trial that's going to help the client win the case? And so that's a very interesting arc of just understanding different elements of legal tech, like not just where does it fit in, but the context of it and what's the ultimate goal. And I feel like teams are really trying to emphasize that to their members, saying, listen, you know what? Each of us is rowing kind of together. We're doing something slightly different as a way to contribute to this greater goal of victory or some outcome that really matters for our client. And I'm excited to participate in this session because the insights from the panelists are wonderful. Just super smart, dynamic people, which is one of my favorite things about going to ILTA.
What's the big change? So I used to be a litigator, right? And
Hmm.
and donkeys years ago. And the objective, and by the way, I'm curious because clearly things have moved on and
Yeah.
changed. I know you do a lot in e-discovery, way more than I do. So genuinely curious. And I'm looking forward to your panel. But so what? So there was always this objective, in terms of those 10, the needle in the haystack, right? Like finding the objective was always to sort of narrow it down to those case winning documents. So what really has changed that you're seeing or that the panel's talking about in terms of viewing it in a wider context or a different
Yeah.
context?
I think that what's happening is, and I think that part of this discussion will be that case management holistically includes some of the things that are happening early on and are happening as a result of what is necessary later on. And I also litigated, and what was I was always responsible for some aspect, right? Some particular getting the documents or taking a deposition or some piece of the puzzle. And we have become experts in different pieces, as we should. And so this discussion, I think, is sort of bringing it all together and saying, there have been a lot of changes. For example, the volume of data has grown exponentially. However, at the end of the day, we're still trying to get the same, it's almost as if the top of the funnel has gotten so large and the different sort of logos or extensions of the kinds of data that are going into that top have expanded. However, the bottom is still the same. You still need to get the key bits of information. It's not as if now we have so much data, so a trial that was 2 weeks is now, you're capable of doing it in 6 months. That's just not how it works, right? That part of the process hasn't changed the way the volume has, and so just kind of thinking about this in a broader context and helping people understand just the overall kind of macro objectives, I think is a
Yeah,
really
fascinating.
important point. Yeah.
I was quite surprised when I first realized, and I should have realized this sooner, but I was quite junior when I was a litigator, and I was doing a lot of the discovery myself. I
Yeah.
didn't really have, in the way that my firm operated, we didn't have like a separate kind of discovery unit almost. And I know a lot of firms, I remember it was probably about 2 years ago at ILTA when I did a session. I can't remember whether you were there or not, but um, with Level Legal talking about, and there were a lot of teams there who were solely responsible for discovery, right? And they're not, and there does seem to be that huge that there was that lot of separation, between the people doing that kind of work and then the people managing the case. And I can see how, if you weren't careful, there would be, it's a case of how do you bring those people together and the process together. And it's great to see that's happening more. That you're starting. It's almost like we talk about this with everything, don't we? I suppose litigation is interesting because you don't choose it, right? It's sort of kind of foisted on you a lot of the time, or you foist it upon somebody else. But I suppose in any event, you need to apply the same methodologies that we talk about with any other tech, which is what is the outcome that you want to achieve, work back from there, right? Like and be in a cohesive fashion and piece it all together from starting out with the outcome. Obviously, you don't always get to choose the outcome. But I guess that's the same methodology, making sure that we're applying the same sort of approach and that it's a kind of cohesive effort.
I think it's by the way, I am going to participate in the Level Legal Roundtable at ILTA. I hope you
Oh,
will
yes,
too. I
I am.
remember I did it at Legal Week this year and it was great.
Yeah.
And not only was it a great
They've offered
conversation, but I
me.
got to connect with lots of individuals in the profession who I would have liked to sit down with anyway. It was really fun and interesting. So I
I
look
thought you
forward
were
to
going to
seeing you
say
there.
that. I thought you were going to say they offered ice cream. That was my reason
Wow.
for.
Listen, I love sweets. So especially if I'm going to be swimming so long a few days later. But I did want to acknowledge something to your point, which is years ago. So I published the annual eDiscovery Unfiltered report. And years ago, in that report for some companies, I do a deep dive evaluation of what people think of them, where their strengths and weaknesses are, where there are market share opportunities. And for one of the companies, I said, people were talking about your project management. So there was like an inconsistency somehow that your project management was so great, but you weren't gaining market share in the way you'd like. And I said you should consider giving some additional training and empowering your project managers, the frontline folks who are really talented, who are really engaging with client contacts on a consistent and sort of depth-filled basis, have them listen to some of the challenges that they may not be listening for because they're only focused on the project management aspects of their work and not realizing that they have this additional talent for picking up on a challenge or an issue. And that really was transformative. And I actually saw this organization the year later, and they said, I just want you to know I was on that call or in that meeting, and I'm responsible for project management. And that was we sat everyone down. And the thing is, not only does it benefit the company, but it makes people, when you recognize that what they're doing is so valuable that they should be thinking about the aspects of it that can have an influence down the road, further down the process, they're adding value in ways they would like to, but didn't realize that they could or that you wanted them to. And you're gaining value from folks who before you were getting great work from, but that work wasn't translating into something either revenue generating or client expanding. And so that's kind of one of the things that we're going to try to address. And I think that's a really important point. I think that in this market, people want to be thinking about how can I do whatever I'm doing plus something that
Yeah.
shows value and shows a distinct value from what adding a new piece of technology can do. And I have a feeling that that will be, I don't know, and I've only seen the agenda as you have, but I have a feeling that that will be part of the discussions this year at
Yeah.
ILTA and all the conversations and at any different event in the fall. Just,
Yeah.
okay, so this is what we've been doing. This is where technology is. Technology is really providing tremendous promise. What does that mean for us? What can we do? How do we leverage that and become all the different descriptors that people, the bionic professional and all these other things that elevate what people are doing? I think people want that. They would love to be elevated, and they just have to have some sort of guidance. And I think there will be a lot of discussions about that, which I'm looking forward to.
But you use two words in the last couple of sentences: training and guidance. And I'm fascinated to see what topics do come up. But I'm betting you that training and guidance aren't the emphasis. And I was just having some conversations this week. It was in the Gen AI space, like talking about how people are using it and getting the most and responding to some of the recent concerns over hallucination, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing but the point of bringing this up wasn't to talk about Gen AI, it was to talk about the training part, right? And that this can apply to any technology or process. We were saying that law firms are pretty horrible at it. Like there's so many opportunities, both for using new technology, but using it in the way that, within guardrails and improving your processes and all of the things that you've just touched on. But what we don't do still, and there are exceptions, but they don't train people, right? And there's so many opportunities that could come about if people given lawyers by their nature, and we're not talking just about lawyers. I'm always very conscious that the law firms are made up of all of their parts. So but lawyers are by their nature very cautious, right? And so they're actually probably less likely to go off and try new things within that environment. People that work in business services are also probably, they inherit some of that caution, right? And they're sensible, super clever, bright people. But there's just that culture of caution, I think, which is rightly so. They're trusted with a lot of money and a lot of outcomes, but training, some of the conversations I've been having in the last few days are, why are we not making time to provide training for people who want to evolve, want to try new things, but unless you give them training and guidance, they're not going to do it.
So I am having a wonderful guest on the virtual lunch today, and her name is Laura Wenzel. She's the Global Marketing and Insights Director at iManage, and she's going to be talking about a new report I was lucky to work on with iManage, Affinity Consulting, and Carrot, but it's called the Changemakers Report. And in that report, I surveyed COOs, CIOs, other leaders at mid-sized law firms. And two of the reasons they gave for not being able to necessarily optimize their technology usage at their firm was training, of course, and awareness. So people didn't know that either the firm had the tool or that the tool could do what they needed it to do. The thing that I would suggest to people is, yes, there should be a greater focus on training. I think in many of the challenges to that include people being willing to make the time for the training. So I don't necessarily know that the responsibility is on the offerer of the provider of the training. I think firms, corporations, they're providing some kind of training. I think that people should see this as a tremendous opportunity and an easy opportunity to stand out. If you were to take one of these solo training programs and try on your own and be proactive, I think you'd get a tremendous benefit and you'd be acknowledged and recognized in ways that you didn't realize were possible, that your organization wants you to have whatever training's available, and there's lots of it, and there's lots of free training. And so I agree with you that training is a challenge. I think that the bigger challenge is often not just good training, it's people being willing to make the time for training and being
Mm.
willing to take advantage of self-service opportunities to learn. And there are lots of opportunities for that. But Laura will be on talking about that this what the research shows in that in
Yeah.
particular training and awareness.
No, she's great. I look forward to hearing that. So, but I think the culture should be that it's, I don't know. I understand the billable hour, blah blah blah, like, but they or whatever it might be, just too busy. I think it should be mandatory. Like it's just, I think law firms, this culture of, I think this it's an old fashioned. It's worked for years, and they're professionals and they're intelligent, and but there's a certain element of pandering that really gets under my skin. I'm just like, what, in other industries they don't tolerate this culture of, well, I just haven't got time, I'm not going to do it. Like, give you an example of something that came up, and this was in the Gen AI space. So I was talking about what we should be using it for, right? There's been some really interesting studies from Stanford University talking about how it can hallucinate. Surprise, surprise. There's so many great use cases where people can be using it, but a lot of people are not using it or using it for all the wrong reasons, right? Because they generally, there's guidance, there's policies. I've spoken to a lot of law firms about how they're approaching this, and they create policies and some guidance. Some of them are prohibitive, some of them just they just say, well, these are the guardrails. And then in a lot of cases, then off you go, right? And that's absolutely, it's kind of nuts that they don't say, right. And I understand that it's really difficult. I've been in that environment. You've been in that environment. It is really difficult. But mandatory training. Okay, this is a new technology that's going to underpin everything that we do for the next however many years. You will come to some training within the next 2 weeks. You will find the time, book in. This is our online booking system. It's not rocket science. You can do it online perhaps, but you have to do it. We may even give you a little test at the, I don't know, that's not practical actually, the testing, but just do it, because then you could, be from all sorts of points of view, professional negligence potentially, right? Like, you've got technology that's going to be making stuff up right now, that if you're just allowed to use it, you may miss something. From a adoption point of view, you've got technology that people need to be familiar with. They should be learning, they should be providing tech that people can just play around with quite safely to start with, for a start.
You know what's interesting, and a lot of the leaders that I've spoken to have kind of described this challenge. So most people get onboarding training. They get,
Mm,
this is our system. We use iManage, for example, and that's our system. And a number of firms are increasingly offering kind of like a just-in-time learning. And so I need to figure out how to draft this clause. There's either a clause builder or there's a 3-minute video, and there are several organizations that offer really great training like this that firms subscribe to. The issue is more one of training yourself to use tools on an everyday basis that make you more efficient, make you faster, make you better, make you able to be more responsive. And I think that's sort of the area. It's sort of, I know generally that my firm has a time and billing system and a document management system and a case management system and what we use for e-discovery and other kind of specific tools, maybe trust and estates. And I also know that if I really need help, the firm has a incredible knowledge management system. I can do a search and I can find a partner or the head of knowledge management saying, give me quick instructions on how to do something. It's more of like, well, what do you do every day? Is there an efficient way that you could enter your time that you don't? That the time, using Gen AI, for example, to create a time entry, you probably, maybe you didn't go to that training or forgot, or they're not even, they're not even doing it. And I think that that's an interesting point. It's sort of like, yeah, firms do this. They're great at that. They also, a lot of firms increasingly offer this sort of just-in-time opportunity, just like, when you have to fix something in your house and you go onto YouTube and you're like, oh, I didn't realize there was the button behind the refrigerator or, next to the printer. And so I think that, a lot of people have become much handier. I guess they're breaking a
yeah.
lot more stuff. Hopefully they're being safe with it. But I think that's where we falter. And that's probably some of this
Yeah.
discussion.
it won't surprise you at all to learn that some of the conversations I've been having are with Casey Flaherty, who I often refer to, who's at Lex Fusion, but he's been in-house in the past, and he tried to come up with sort of almost like compulsory tech learning, or suggest that it should be compulsory. And he's been an advocate for a really long time of training, and we were saying, people often still don't know how to use Word. They don't know how to use the basic tools, and they're taking too much time doing basic tasks because they've never really been trained on how to use the tools that they use every day. And that is true for so many people, right? I mean, and that I think that kind of training that you talked about is great. That at the point of need type quick videos, that's really great. Like you say, I'll be Googling or YouTubing, and so the legal equivalent of that. And I think there's been changes, like, so LTC4, which you may be familiar with, they've had some changes internally recently, so it's made it much easier for firms to consume, to interact with them, really, to understand they've got a better website, so you can go on and you can find providers, and there's obviously lots of different vendors who are providing all kinds of different training, but at the end of the day, unless your people do it, and then they're still not going to know, then. And I do think that there should be an element of mandate, it should be mandatory, so some of it should be mandatory.
A lot of firms are also increasingly sending around tips and tricks. Did you know? I remember once I saw, 10 things you don't know you can do with your iPhone, for example. And I didn't realize that you could move the cursor by pressing the space bar. And I felt like that was such an incredible little trick. And there were several things like that. And so more and more firms are doing that, but the firm can't force you to read it. I mean, I guess it
No.
could somehow, but I think I believe in some level of right personal accountability here, that if you're struggling with something, ask yourself, am I doing a little bit more to address that? Or am I just saying that the firm should have some training? Because the truth is, even if your firm doesn't offer it, it's available somewhere. And
Yeah.
the I can't imagine that not every single tip and trick on all of the basics, for sure, Word and Excel and PowerPoint and Canva and all these, any other tool, that
Mm.
they're out there, they're available to you. I needed to create a graphic for this program, and I couldn't figure out how to make a little waveform. And I went into Canva, I went into YouTube, and I said, "Look, I'm in Canva. I'm trying to make a waveform." It's a very nice person got up there. They had 50,000 other people had watched this, and in 30 seconds it showed me how to make a little waveform. You don't even have to have a premium account. So it's just so interesting, and I think that
Yeah.
that's a really important point. I think that the other thing that people should take advantage of is, if they do have questions about these things, especially at an event like ILTACON, which is coming up, that they should walk up to the booth and tell people, and I encourage them to engage, because people really want to.
It's that mindset difference. It's that mindset difference, like, and it's, I think it partly is giving people the, maybe even, I've been, right, this is a real digression, but I've been listening to this great podcast called The
I
Mindset
don't
Men.
think it's a digression. I think the whole program is a digression. Maybe we're getting back on track, so you never know.
I'm so I run my business, and I have to write, and I have to do everything. I make the tea, I walk the dog. and
In
and
that order. I
right, and
write,
then,
I make
yeah,
the tea, I walk the dog.
and I'm trying to train the dog to make the tea. It's rubbish. So anyway, so sometimes I get overwhelmed. I can relate
The
to
dog's
the,
never gonna make the tea. You should try to train the dog to write.
oh
You
yeah,
make the
oh,
tea.
you
You're
can press
set.
all the buttons for the
That's right. That's
chat
right. There you
GPT.
go.
Like,
Forget about ChatGPT. That's right.
so I get that overwhelm, I get that busyness, I get that never having 5 seconds to, and I've been listening to this podcast where it's talking about, and I think right now with I think everyone has overwhelm, right? I think everybody's being told what to do, and everyone's got so much on their plate, and there's so much change, and I think actually this podcast was so helpful in terms of making, to doing exercise, which Ari, you're always amazing at, so doing, being fit and healthy. Use the cheering in the background on silent. So taking time for yourself, it feels like a waste of time, it feels like you're losing time, but you're gaining time, right? So I've been one thing I'm you're always great at sharing with me and other people, you're kind of such a health guru, and people learn from you. But one thing I've been with my
Sure.
headphones, with my headphones, I've been going for, thinking, walking and thinking, right? And it feels like you're losing time. It feels like, oh, I should be at my desk, but you gain time if you, and I've been going to the gym more in the last couple of weeks. And the time that you lose, you actually gain, right? So it's almost like trying to encourage people who are really busy just to take a little bit of time out of their day to have a think about how they do things, and maybe do that over a walk while they're thinking about how they're going to solve a problem or what have you. But give yourself a bit of time away from your desk, perhaps in the air, get a bit of, we don't have any sunshine in the UK, but, get a bit of rain in your face, a bit of summer rain. And, I think that's maybe what people need to do more of, right? Take time away, constructive thinking time, and then obviously go back and, think, right, where are the gaps in what I do? How could I be more efficient? But it's really hard to do that when you're in the depths of, sitting at your desk with the overwhelm and emails coming in, and it's hard to do things differently if you're just doing things the same way every day.
I want to close with this point because I think it's powerful. You mentioned this idea of overwhelm, and Darren Nevin at FTI Technology wrote a book called The Journey's the Thing. And it's a series of essays that she wrote throughout the pandemic. And they're beautiful essays and they're very impactful. And she wrote one called Overwhelm. And it was just really meaningful to me. And I felt like in that moment, we all had this tremendous sense of overwhelm in every possible aspect. And and yet a lot of those themes are recurring. You don't have to have overwhelm every day, but everybody can appreciate what it feels like. And I think that, yes, you're right. Like, it's summer. Let's just take a breath. And it's Friday. That's when we record, everyone. I mean, the one. And so I encourage people to look at that book, The Journey's the Thing. And that's my weekend recommendation. My
Okay.
recommendation for when you're traveling, you have a long trip to Nashville. I'll have a little bit of a shorter trip, but I will look forward to seeing you there. And I'm looking
With our
forward
microphone.
to, yes, the karaoke mics. Well, we'll be carrying around. People are going to want those. We may have to have, mics to give out as
We
souvenirs.
may have.
So thank you all for joining us for this episode of Charting
Starting
Change
change
in
in legal.
Legal.